So let's talk a little bit about the Roman Republic. As you can see from this chart, the Roman Republic starts off small, that pink area around Rome, and over time it will add territory. And by the time we get to around 146 BC, you'll see that the Roman Republic has grown to control much of what today would be Spain, Greece, parts of northern Africa, and a lot of the Mediterranean islands and region. So the Republic is growing. A lot of people think that a republic, when you compare it to, say, the Roman Empire, wasn't very powerful. But again, a republic can be strong. The United States of America today is a republic and yet still flexes all around the world. The Roman Republic was growing and influencing the whole neighborhood. And of course, not everybody was excited about Rome growing as a republic, and so the Romans started to bump into their neighbors across the Mediterranean in northern Africa of Carthage. So Carthage itself was an ancient civilization started by the Phoenicians, and so these two kind of powerhouses start to interact, and they will have a series of wars, 3 wars that will last around 120 years, called the Punic Wars, between Rome and Carthage. So maybe it's helpful to think of Rome as a dog in the region and Carthage as another dog, and they both wanted the bone, the Mediterranean region. Both of these powerhouses wanted to control the Mediterranean, and of course it's going to lead to war, a series of wars that will last over 100 years. The First Punic War between Rome and Carthage, 264 BC, mostly over Sicily. That boot of Italy is kicking Sicily. It kind of looks like a ball or something at the end of the peninsula there. Rome wanted it, so did Carthage. It will lead to about a 20-year war between Rome and Carthage. You know, the Romans had a great army. Even the Republic had an army. But the Carthaginians had really a great navy during this war. And the Romans wanted a navy much like that of Carthage. So they will start to build and develop a navy. And one of the things they're going to do is, seems basic to us now, but they will basically design a kind of a little bridge that they can lower down from their ship onto the ships of the Carthage navy and run across that bridge. We call it a corvus, and attack hand to hand. So, you know, the United States Navy, we have ships that fight other ships, shoot cannons, guns, missiles, aircraft land on those ships and take off. But what happens when the Navy has to go onto another boat or onto land to fight? So this has always kind of been something the Navy, not just the United States Navy, but the Romans, everyone has thought about, okay, we got great ships, but what happens when we have to really fight on land or on other ships? And so, of course, the United States develops the United States Marine Corps. This would be the land fighting force of the United States Navy. So when you've got to board a boat or go onto land, they send the Marines. When the Romans, when they would go to another boat, they would use the corvus and turn a water fight, a naval battle, into a hand-to-hand battle, which the Romans had a slight advantage in that sense. So again, the corvus, this new invention that will come about during the First Punic Wars, the Romans win the Punic War number 1. Punic War number 2, a few years later, obviously Carthage is not happy about losing it, and this one is maybe the most famous. They're not happy about losing the First Punic War, and so we get the Second Punic War. This one is more famous in that there are a few more famous people, and I guess you would say animals. There is a general of Carthage named Hannibal Barca. He is the most famous Carthage general. He will do something really unexpected. He will attack Rome going the long way around up through Spain using elephants. So it'll take 46,000 soldiers and 37 elephants and attack Rome from the north. Nobody would expect him to come that way. And, it's going to be a hard route going over the Alps with elephants. Not all of the men or elephants will survive it, but he goes down in history for doing this bold move. Not many people bring elephants into war back in the day, but he's outside the gates of Rome for a while. He just can't get the knockout punch in Rome. Even though he's done something bold, Hannibal is waiting and waiting, and finally he's called back to fight because the Romans are now attacking down in right side of Carthage at the Battle of Zama at 202 BC. Again, we're counting down when we're in BC, so the numbers are going in the opposite direction you would think. But of course, they did not know it was 202 back then. We just use this today to give us an idea of when it happened. They did not say it was 202 BC. They didn't know that the birth of Jesus would come and that the church would be developed and they would change the calendar. They didn't know that. But we look back and we say at 202 BC, Hannibal is called back to fight the Roman general Scipio, and they have this epic battle at the Battle of Zama. Rome wins the Second Punic War, so Rome is now 2-0, Carthage is 0-2. The Third Punic War is not much of a war. I think Rome was just trying to do away with Carthage once and for all. In 146 BC, they attack and destroy Carthage, and they will burn everything and plow salt into the ground so that Carthage could never grow anything and could never rise up again to be a threat. So Rome dominates all three Punic Wars. Probably the most interesting would be the Second Punic War. So we begin now, right after the Punic Wars, to kind of transition from a Roman Republic to a Roman Empire. Remember, a republic is when we had the Senate that was making the rules, and we had consuls and a whole bunch of people elected or selected to run the Roman government. But over time, that will shift to one person in charge. A republic will transition into an empire. And after the Punic Wars, there are many problems in Rome. There were a lot of fighting between the rich and the poor. There was a lot of fighting between the consuls, think of them as like presidents, and the Senate. And there are several who tried to change and make things in Rome better. The Gracchus brothers, Gaius Marius, Sulla, these are all popular reformers, but they cannot stop what's coming. The empire is coming. It's just people don't know how to stop it, really. There's a few efforts. They don't know that an empire is coming. They just know things are not the way they used to be. They'll try something creative. The Senate will agree to create a triumvirate, the first triumvirate, made up of generals to try to keep order and try to reform things. Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. This triumvirate idea was kind of a new thing for the Romans. It works for a little while, but again, there's a lot of things that are good about having three people in charge. There are a lot of negatives about having three people in charge. But this idea is floated from time to time. Even when the founding fathers of the United States were trying to decide if we should have a president, there was some talk that we should have multiple presidents, maybe even three, in the idea of a triumvirate, to try to keep it from being one person all-powerful. Right? So there's some negatives and there's some positives of having three people in charge. But in the end, this starts to break down. And Julius Caesar is clearly the most ambitious of these three, and everybody in the Roman Senate knows it. Pompey and Crassus know it. They try to keep Caesar away. He's up in what would be France. Back then it was called Gaul. And he's ordered to stay up there, not come back. In fact, he's not allowed to bring his army back because everyone was pretty nervous what Caesar would do when he came back. So Caesar has a big choice to make. Does he just follow the rules and kind of fade into history as one of maybe just a few generals who kind of were a big deal? Or does he become the biggest deal of them all? And of course, there's no surprises in history. Julius Caesar makes an epic choice, right? He brings his army across a river that you're not supposed to do. When he brings his army across the Rubicon River, he's breaking the rules. And everyone knows that he's going to come and try to take charge. It would be a civil war in the Roman Republic. And Julius Caesar, when he crosses the Rubicon River in 50 BC, changes everything. So even today, we say when you make a big decision that you can't go back on or you can't change, we call it crossing the Rubicon. So Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon literally and figuratively. He makes this decision that now will change history. When he arrives back in Rome, he quickly dispenses with his political enemies, military enemies, and he is on top. Julius Caesar is consul and maybe consul plus, because he's kind of heading towards the emperor road, and maybe one of the most famous men in history. But of course, we know what happens to him. The senators are scared of his power, and so he is attacked and killed on March 15th, 44 BC, by Brutus and other senators he would consider friends, but he's literally stabbed in the back and figuratively stabbed in the back. So he's dead. And there's a civil war after he dies, because who's in charge now? They try to bring back a triumvirate, this time the second triumvirate, Octavian, which was his adopted son, kind of a nephew that becomes really Julius Caesar's son, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. And that works for a while. Of course, Lepidus, probably the smartest guy around, quickly retires when things get hot because he probably doesn't want to die. So that leaves Octavian and Mark Antony, to fight it out. So they're rivals in 31 BC. And of course, we can't really talk about this story without talking about Cleopatra. So Cleopatra is in the mix as well. She was connected to Julius Caesar. They had a son together as kind of a political alliance, maybe romance, we just don't know. But in the end, Cleopatra aligns herself with Mark Antony, and they take on Octavian. So it's kind of goes down like this: Mark Antony and Cleopatra on one side versus Octavian, and most of the senators back in Rome believe that Octavian is the one for them. They don't really trust Cleopatra and Mark Antony. So in 31 BC, there's this kind of major battle called the Battle of Actium or Actium, right outside of Greece. And in the end, you can see there by the star, Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium are defeated and will subsequently commit suicide rather than go back and face justice or the Roman Senate. So they're out of the way, and that leaves us with one clear leader, Octavian. Around 27 BC, he will change his name or his title to Caesar, as in like Julius Caesar. Now that word becomes basically like king, and Augustus, the revered one or the majestic one. So Caesar Augustus really would be our first true Roman emperor. Julius Caesar was kind of on the bubble. Probably would have gone that way had he lived long enough. So Caesar Augustus, 27 BC. Just refresh, remember the Roman era has really three distinct parts, maybe like an Oreo cookie. The founding era, where you would have like the Latins, the Etruscans, Romulus and Remus myth, and then of course about 500 years of a republic. That would be during like the Punic Wars, and Julius Caesar right there at the very end. And now we begin the empire with Caesar Augustus. Caesar Augustus is really the first of many Roman emperors, and when he becomes emperor, there will be about 200 years of Pax Romana, Roman peace. There won't be any major wars. It's not that Caesar Augustus lives that long, but he and the emperors that come right after him kind of reign over a period of peace where no one will really challenge the Roman authority. So the Roman Empire will go on for about 500 years after Julius Caesar, starting with Caesar Augustus. So 500 years of Roman Empire. So about 500 years of Roman Republic and about 500 years of a Roman Empire. And you can look at some of these charts. There's lots of Roman emperors, some of which were crazy, some were great. Nobody was perfect, of course. There's some wicked, some tried to do the right thing. Here's another way of looking at them. But it is a long list of emperors, and we will go into, or the class will go into many of these, but not all of them. Probably 5 to 7 of these will be ones that kind of stand out and being truly historic. So now the Roman emperor list here and the Roman Empire for about 500 years.